It's a perfect summer evening at Lake Winnipesaukee, the kind where golden sunlight dances across rippling water and the air is thick with the smell of grilled food and childhood memories. The Davidson's lake house, an impressive structure of wood and glass overlooking the water, hosts a gathering that on the surface appears to be nothing more than a joyous celebration. Two families, bound by 20 years of friendship, have come together to celebrate Emily Parker's high school graduation. No one could have known that this night would later be remembered as the beginning of the end. Michael Davidson stands at the edge of the deck, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun, raising a glass to make a toast. At 42, he cuts an impressive figure, successful investment banker, devoted father, trusted friend. His steel-gray eyes scan the gathered crowd before settling on Emily, seated between his children, Amy and Jake. "I remember the day Emily was born," Michael begins, his voice carrying the warmth of 2 decades of shared history. "Robert called me from the hospital, crying like a baby himself." Gentle laughter ripples through the gathering. "And now here she is, 18 and headed to NYU in the fall. We've watched her grow up alongside our own kids, and I couldn't be prouder if she were my own daughter." The words hang in the air, heavy with an irony that would only become apparent later. Emily shifts in her seat, her cheeks flushing slightly as she tucks a strand of dark hair behind her ear. To everyone present, it's nothing more than the natural embarrassment of a teenager being praised by a family friend. But beneath the surface, something else stirs, a tension, invisible yet palpable, like electricity before a storm. Lisa Davidson, Michael's wife of 15 years, stands nearby, her hand resting on their son Jake's shoulder. At 40, she remains striking. Success suits her, evident in her confident posture and the sharp intelligence in her eyes. As a corporate lawyer, she's built a reputation for being both brilliant and compassionate, qualities that extend to her role as a mother and friend. She smiles at Michael's words, completely unaware that her perfectly constructed world is about to shatter. The Davidsons and Parkers have been inseparable since their college days. Their children grew up together, sharing summer vacations at this very lake house, celebrating holidays, marking life's milestones as one extended family. Michael and Robert's friendship served as the foundation, two men who seemed more like brothers than friends, their bond strengthened by years of shared experiences and unwavering trust. But recent months have brought changes. Robert and Jennifer Parker's marriage has begun to crumble, their impending divorce sending shockwaves through their tight-knit social circle. Emily, caught in the crossfire of her parents' separation, has increasingly sought refuge in the stability of the Davidson household. It seems natural to everyone. After all, isn't that what family friends are for? Michael continues his speech, reminiscing about camping trips and birthday parties, beach days and winter ski weekends. His words paint a picture of innocent family connections, but there's something in the way his gaze keeps returning to Emily that would later haunt those who witnessed this moment. It's subtle, a lingering look here, a shared glance there, nothing that would raise alarm bells on this warm summer evening. Amy Davidson, 14 and already showing signs of her mother's beauty and father's charm, sits close to Emily, their friendship transcending the 4-year age gap. They giggle together at Michael's stories, sharing the easy intimacy of sisters. Jake, 11 and more interested in his video games than the festivities, barely looks up from his phone. They are children of privilege, growing up in a world where trust is assumed and safety is taken for granted. Jennifer Parker watches the scene unfold from her position near the lake, her face bearing the strain of recent months. The divorce has taken its toll, adding lines of worry around her eyes and mouth. She's grateful for the Davidsons' support during this difficult time, especially Michael's mentorship of Emily. If only she knew the true nature of that mentorship, how it would evolve into something dark and destructive. Robert Parker stands slightly apart from the group, his usual jovial demeanor subdued by recent events. At 45, he's fighting to keep his construction business afloat while navigating the choppy waters of divorce. His friendship with Michael has been a lifeline during these troubled times, making the betrayal to come all the more bitter. As the evening progresses, the adults drift toward the deck while the younger ones head down to the lake. Emily helps Amy and Jake set up sparklers, their laughter carrying across the water. Michael watches from above, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. Lisa joins him, wrapping an arm around his waist, the picture of marital contentment. The history between these families runs deep. 20 years of shared holidays, Thanksgiving dinners where Michael and Robert deep-fried turkeys while Lisa and Jennifer prepared traditional sides, Christmas mornings where the children burst into each other's homes to compare presents, 4th of July weekends at this very lake house where the families would gather to watch fireworks reflect off the water. Every summer since Emily was born, the Parkers and Davidsons spent 2 weeks here together. The children learned to swim in these waters, built sandcastles on these shores, grew up considering themselves more siblings than friends. Michael taught them all to water ski, his patience and encouragement earning him the affectionate title Uncle Mike. But something has shifted in recent months, a subtle change that no one quite notices yet. Emily's calls of Uncle Mike have grown softer, more hesitant. Their interactions, once naturally affectionate, now carry an undercurrent of awareness. The transformation is happening right before everyone's eyes, yet no one sees it. The way trusted family friend becomes something else entirely, something dangerous. As night falls over Lake Winnipesaukee, the party begins to wind down. Hugs are exchanged, plans made for future gatherings. Emily lingers slightly longer than necessary when Michael embraces her, a moment too brief for anyone to notice but long enough to plant the seed of what's to come. The families separate, returning to their respective lake houses just down the shore from each other. Lisa helps clean up while Michael puts the kids to bed. Everything appears normal, peaceful. But beneath this tranquil surface, forces are already in motion that will tear these families apart, destroy decades of friendship, and ultimately end in tragedy. No one at the graduation celebration could have predicted how their lives would unravel in the months to come. They couldn't have known that this perfect summer evening marked the beginning of a dark journey that would lead to betrayal, violence, and death. The trust built over 20 years would prove to be the very thing that made the betrayal possible, and the close bonds between the families would make the eventual destruction all the more devastating. This is where our story begins, not with scandal or violence, but with a simple family gathering on a beautiful summer evening. The stage is set, the players are in position, and the tragedy is about to unfold. The question isn't just how this happened, but how no one saw it coming until it was too late. The changes began so subtly that no one noticed them at first. January 2023 arrived with the sharp crack of Robert Parker's announcement. He and Jennifer were filing for divorce. The news rippled through their social circle, but nowhere did it hit harder than with their daughter Emily. The stability she had known all her life began to crumble, piece by piece. In those early days, it seemed natural when Emily started spending more time at the Davidson house. After all, this was her second home, had been since she was a child. Lisa welcomed her presence, seeing it as a way to provide stability during a difficult time. The Davidson children, especially Amy, were thrilled to have their sister around more often. And Michael. Michael was just being supportive Uncle Mike, wasn't he? But something had shifted in the way Michael looked at Emily. The change was imperceptible at first, a lingering glance here, an extended moment of eye contact there. During family dinners, he began positioning himself to sit across from her, their feet occasionally brushing under the table. These moments were so brief, so innocent-seeming, that Emily herself couldn't be sure if she was imagining them. February brought heavy snow and with it, more reasons for Emily to seek refuge with the Davidsons. Her own home had become a battlefield of lawyers' letters and whispered phone calls. Michael would pick her up after school on days when the weather was bad, just as he'd done countless times before. But now their car rides were different, longer, filled with conversations that went deeper than usual. "You're not like other teenagers, Emily," he would say, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't noticed before. "You understand things on a different level." These words, seemingly harmless, were the first threads in a web of manipulation that would eventually entangle them both. As winter melted into spring, the text messages began. It started innocently enough, Michael checking on Emily after particularly difficult days at home. But soon the messages became more frequent, arriving late at night when Lisa was asleep beside him. Emily found herself waiting for them, her phone clutched tight as she lay in her bed, torn between excitement and confusion. March saw the first real crossing of boundaries. During a family dinner at the Davidsons, Michael cornered Emily in the kitchen while everyone else was in the living room. "I've noticed you've seemed down lately," he said, standing closer than necessary. "You know you can always talk to me, right? About anything." His hand brushed her arm, lingering just a moment too long. Emily felt a shiver she couldn't quite explain. The grooming was calculated, methodical. Michael knew exactly what he was doing, though he would later claim he had been caught up in something beyond his control. He played on Emily's vulnerability, her need for stability during her parents' divorce. He positioned himself as the only one who truly understood her, who saw her as an adult rather than a child. April brought warmer weather and with it, more opportunities for casual contact. Family gatherings became a delicate dance of secret glances and brief touches. Michael would find reasons to be alone with Emily, helping her with college application essays, discussing her parents' divorce, offering advice that slowly turned more personal, more intimate. During one such conversation, hidden in his home office while a family barbecue continued outside, Michael first touched Emily's face. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his fingers tracing her cheekbone. "So mature for your age." Emily froze, her heart pounding, caught between the familiar comfort of Uncle Mike and this new, dangerous dynamic. May arrived with increasing heat and tension. The late-night pool incident marked a point of no return. Emily had been swimming alone, trying to clear her head after another argument at home. Michael appeared on the deck, watched her for a while, then joined her in the water. What happened next would replay in Emily's mind countless times. The way he moved closer, how the moonlight reflected off the water, the first electric touch of his hand on her waist. Their first kiss came during a Memorial Day barbecue, of all places. While families chatted on the deck and children played in the yard, Michael and Emily found themselves alone in the pool house. Later, Emily would struggle to remember who moved first, only the rush of adrenaline, the taste of beer on his breath, and the overwhelming sense that everything was changing. June saw their relationship spiral into something neither could control. Secret meetings became more frequent, more desperate. They developed a code through text messages, innocent-seeming words that carried hidden meanings. Michael would find reasons to drive Emily places alone, taking detours down quiet roads where they couldn't be seen. The trust built over 2 decades became their greatest cover. Who would question Michael Davidson taking his best friend's daughter to look at colleges? Who would suspect anything when Emily spent time at their house, as she had done her entire life? Even Lisa, sharp as she was, saw only what she expected to see, her husband being kind to a girl who needed father figure in her life. But there were signs, had anyone been looking closely enough. Emily's behavior began to change. She grew distant from Amy, the girl who had been like a sister to her. She checked her phone constantly, jumped when it buzzed. Michael became distracted during family times, his eyes always seeking Emily in a room. The weight of their secret began to take its toll. Emily lost weight, her usual vibrant personality dimming. Michael became short-tempered with Lisa and the kids, though he couldn't explain why. The very foundations of their families were cracking, though the earthquake that would destroy them all was still to come. As summer approached, their meetings grew more reckless. Quick kisses in the kitchen during family gatherings turned into longer encounters in hidden corners. Michael began manufacturing reasons to be alone with Emily, college preparation meetings that never actually discussed college, mentoring sessions that had nothing to do with mentoring. Their shared history became both shield and weapon. Every family connection, every trusted relationship they exploited, added another layer to their eventual undoing. The very closeness of the families that made their secret possible would make its discovery all the more devastating. By the time July approached, what had begun as subtle glances and innocent touches had evolved into something dark and dangerous. The trusted family friend had become something else entirely, and the sweet girl who had grown up calling him Uncle Mike was trapped in a web of manipulation and desire from which she couldn't see an escape. The stage was set for discovery, for confrontation, for tragedy. But in those early summer days, as they balanced on the knife edge of exposure, neither Michael nor Emily could see the destruction that lay ahead. They were too caught up in their secret world, too blinded by what they had convinced themselves was love rather than predation. The changes were complete. There was no going back to innocent family gatherings and trusted relationships. The only question that remained was not if their secret would be discovered, but when and at what cost to everyone involved. By July 2023, the affair between Michael Davidson and Emily Parker had evolved into something dark and all-consuming. Family gatherings, once occasions of genuine joy, became elaborate stages for their deception. Every shared glance, every casual touch, carried the weight of their secret. The lake house, particularly, became their sanctuary of lies. During a 4th of July celebration, while fireworks exploded overhead and families gathered on the beach, Michael and Emily slipped away to the boathouse. "I can't stand being so close to you and not touching you," he whispered, his words carrying the possessiveness that had begun to characterize their relationship. These moments, stolen between family activities, grew more frequent and more reckless. Emily's phone became a lifeline of secret messages. Working late, Michael would text, but his car would be parked 2 streets over, waiting. Studying at the library, Emily would tell her mother, only to spend hours in hidden corners of their small town with Michael. The web of lies grew more complex with each passing day. The transformation in Emily became impossible to ignore. The vibrant, confident teenager who had once dominated social gatherings now withdrew into herself. Her phone became an extension of her hand, her responses to messages immediate and anxious. When she wasn't with Michael, she was waiting to be with him, her world shrinking to accommodate their secret. "You're the only one who really understands me," Michael would tell her, words carefully chosen to deepen her emotional dependency. "No one else sees you the way I do." These phrases, repeated like mantras, isolated Emily further from her support system. Her closest friends, once constants in her life, found themselves shut out one by one. Lisa Davidson noticed changes in her husband too, though she couldn't quite name what was different. Michael became distant, irritable. His usual patience with their children waned. When Amy asked why he was always texting, he snapped at her with unprecedented harshness. Family dinners, once full of conversation and laughter, grew tense and silent. The Davidson children sensed the shift in their household's atmosphere. 14-year-old Amy, particularly perceptive, noticed how her father's mood would lift mysteriously when Emily was around, only to darken again after she left. Jake, at 11, withdrew into video games, his way of escaping the unnamed tension that filled their home. Close calls became more frequent as summer progressed. One August afternoon, Lisa nearly walked in on them in Michael's home office. The sound of her approaching footsteps sent Emily scrambling to appear casual, her heart pounding as Lisa entered to find them supposedly discussing college applications. Michael's calm facade never cracked, but Emily's hands trembled for hours afterward. The lake house incident in mid-August almost exposed everything. During another family weekend, Jennifer Parker went looking for Emily late one night, only to find the boathouse door locked. Inside, Michael and Emily froze at the sound of her voice calling out. Only quick thinking and another lie, Emily claiming she'd been crying about the divorce and wanted to be alone, prevented discovery. Text messages became their downfall. Michael grew careless, leaving his phone unlocked more frequently. One evening, while he showered, a message from Emily popped up on his screen. "I miss your touch." Lisa, walking past the phone on their bedroom dresser, caught a glimpse but dismissed it, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes had seen. The whispers started in their small community. Nothing concrete, just murmurs about how close Michael and Emily seemed, how often they were seen talking privately at gatherings. These rumors, like smoke before a fire, drifted through their social circle. Friends exchanged worried glances when Michael would find reasons to drive Emily home alone. Emily's relationship with Amy, once sisterly in its closeness, deteriorated rapidly. How could she maintain that bond while secretly involved with Amy's father? The guilt ate at her, manifesting in sharp words and unexplained cancellations of their plans. Amy, hurt and confused, couldn't understand why her best friend had become a stranger. The recklessness grew with each successful deception. They began taking bigger risks, meeting in more public places, extending their time alone together, growing bolder in their displays of affection when they thought no one was watching. Michael's control over Emily tightened, his demands for her time and attention increasing. Robert Parker, still struggling with his divorce, remained blind to his daughter's transformation. When he did notice Emily's changes, he attributed them to the stress of their family situation. His trust in Michael, his best friend of 20 years, never wavered. This trust would later haunt him with devastating consequences. Jennifer Parker, however, began to sense something was wrong with her daughter. Mother's intuition picked up on the subtle shifts in Emily's behavior, the secretive phone calls, the vague explanations of her whereabouts, the emotional distance that grew between them. But like Lisa, she couldn't, or wouldn't, connect the dots that were forming a devastating picture. The strain began showing in Michael's work life as well. The investment banker, known for his sharp focus and attention to detail, started making small mistakes. Meetings were missed, deadlines barely met. His mind was constantly elsewhere, consumed by the next opportunity to be with Emily. As August drew to a close, their careful facade began cracking under the pressure. Emily's guilt manifested in physical symptoms, anxiety attacks, sleepless nights, loss of appetite. Michael's possessiveness grew stronger, his texts more demanding, his need to control their narrative more pronounced. The community whispers grew louder. At a local coffee shop, two mothers discussed how Michael always seemed to be wherever Emily was. At the country club, members noticed his lingering glances, the way Emily would blush and look away. But no one wanted to voice their suspicions about a man as respected as Michael Davidson. The weight of their secret became almost unbearable. Emily started having panic attacks, hiding in her room for hours. Michael's mood swings grew more pronounced, causing concern among his colleagues and friends. The pressure was building, like a pot about to boil over. The end of summer approached with a sense of impending doom. College loomed for Emily, threatening to separate them. Michael's possessiveness intensified at the thought of her leaving, his messages becoming more controlling, more desperate. What had started as his manipulation of her had evolved into a mutual destruction, pulling them both deeper into a darkness from which there seemed no escape. The facade was crumbling, the carefully constructed lies beginning to collapse under their own weight. Discovery was inevitable. The only questions were when, and at what cost to everyone involved. The peaceful community had no idea that it was sitting on a powder keg of secrets, lies, and betrayal that would soon explode with devastating consequences. The unraveling began in late August, as summer's golden glow faded into autumn's approaching chill. Emily Parker sat in her room, staring at her phone, her finger hovering over dozens of unsent messages to Michael. College orientation at NYU was just 2 weeks away, and with that looming deadline came a crushing realization: she needed to end this. "I can't do this anymore," she finally typed, then quickly deleted it. Each attempt to break free seemed to tangle her more deeply in Michael's web. His response to her slightest withdrawal had become increasingly volatile, his messages oscillating between desperate love declarations and thinly veiled threats. "If you leave, I'll tell everyone it was your fault," he had texted the night before. "Who do you think they'll believe? The respected family man or the troubled teenager from a broken home?" The words made Emily's stomach churn, but they achieved their intended effect. She stayed silent, trapped by her own shame and fear. Meanwhile, Lisa Davidson's perfect world was beginning to show cracks. The signs she had been subconsciously ignoring became impossible to dismiss. Credit card statements showed lunch charges for two at times Michael claimed to be working late. His phone would be quickly flipped over whenever she entered a room. Small lies accumulated like snowflakes before an avalanche. The Davidson household, once warm and welcoming, grew cold with unspoken tensions. Amy, now actively avoiding Emily, struggled with a pain she couldn't name. "Dad's different," she confided in Lisa one night. "And Emily, she's not my friend anymore." Lisa hugged her daughter, fighting back her own growing suspicions. The first concrete evidence came on a Tuesday evening in early September. Lisa, loading the washing machine, found a crumpled receipt in Michael's pocket, 2 movie tickets from an afternoon he'd claimed to be at work. It was a small thing, but it sent her detective instincts into overdrive. That night, while Michael slept, Lisa did something she'd never imagined herself doing. She went through his phone. Her hands trembled as she typed in the passcode, their anniversary date, unchanged for years. What she found shattered her world in an instant. The messages were explicit, leaving no room for innocent interpretation. Hundreds of texts between Michael and Emily, spanning months. Photos, plans for secret meetings, declarations of love mixed with manipulation and control. Lisa sat in their bathroom at 3 a.m., physically ill from what she'd discovered. The confrontation that followed would be forever seared into the memories of everyone in the house. Lisa waited until the kids left for school the next morning. "How long?" she asked simply, sliding Michael's phone across the kitchen counter. His face, seeing the unlocked screen, drained of color. "Lisa, I can explain," he began. But she cut him off. "How long?" Each word was a bullet. Michael's confession, when it finally came, was somehow worse than Lisa had imagined. Not just a recent transgression, but months of calculated deception. Every family gathering, every casual dinner, every moment of their shared lives had been tainted by his betrayal. "She's 18, he tried to justify, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "She's Emily," Lisa spat back. "She grew up in our home. She's Amy's best friend. She's Robert's daughter. She calls you Uncle Mike, for God's sake." While the Davidsons' world imploded, across town, Emily was finally breaking under the weight of her secret. Jennifer Parker found her daughter curled up on the bathroom floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The truth poured out in a torrent of guilt and confusion. "Mom, I've done something terrible," Emily choked out. Jennifer, still processing her own divorce, felt her world tilt on its axis as her daughter confessed to the unthinkable. Her first instinct was denial, not Michael, not her friend's husband, not the man they'd trusted for 20 years. But the evidence was undeniable. Emily's phone contained months of messages, each one damning. Jennifer's horror grew as she saw the extent of Michael's manipulation, the way he'd used their family's vulnerability during the divorce to prey on her daughter. The hardest part was still to come. Someone had to tell Robert. Robert Parker was at a construction site when he received the call from Jennifer. "You need to come home now," she said, her voice shaking. "It's about Emily and Michael." The drive home was a blur. Robert's mind refused to process the implications of Jennifer's tone, of Emily's tears in the background. But as he sat in their living room, listening to his daughter's confession, something inside him broke. Every memory of his friendship with Michael replayed in his mind, now tainted by betrayal. The man who'd stood beside him at his wedding, who'd helped him through his divorce, who'd watched his daughter grow up, that man had exploited their trust in the worst possible way. "I trusted you," Emily sobbed during her confession. "We all trusted you." The community erupted as news of the scandal spread. The Davidsons' phone rang constantly. Friends, neighbors, all wanting confirmation of the rumors. Lisa refused to answer, focusing instead on her children's shattered world. Amy, upon learning the truth, locked herself in her room for days, unable to process the betrayal of both her father and her best friend. Michael, confronted with the magnitude of his actions, began to unravel. His carefully constructed justifications crumbled in the face of his family's pain. He moved out at Lisa's insistence, taking refuge in a hotel, his messages to Emily becoming increasingly desperate. "We can get through this," he texted, even as his world collapsed. "No one understands what we have." But Emily, finally free from his influence, saw their relationship for what it was, not love, but predation. With her mother's support, she blocked his number, each message from him feeling like another chain breaking. The final piece fell into place when Robert Parker showed up at Michael's hotel. The confrontation that followed would lead to consequences no one could have predicted, transforming a family scandal into something far more tragic. As summer drew to a close, four families, the Davidsons, the Parkers, and all their children, stood in the wreckage of decades of friendship and trust. What had started with innocent glances and subtle shifts had escalated into a catastrophe that would leave permanent scars on everyone involved. The unraveling was complete, but the true tragedy was still to come. September 15, 2023, began like any other day at the Hampton Inn just off Interstate 95. Michael Davidson had been staying there for 3 days since Lisa forced him out of their home. No one could have predicted that by sunset, one man would be dead and multiple lives would be forever altered. Robert Parker arrived at the hotel shortly after 7 p.m. Security footage would later show him walking through the lobby, his face set with grim determination. He had tracked Michael through a mutual friend, his intentions unclear even to himself as he rode the elevator to the 4th floor. "I just wanted to talk to him," Robert would later tell investigators, his voice hollow with shock. "I needed to understand how he could do this to my little girl." Michael opened the door to room 412 without checking the peephole, perhaps expecting room service or housekeeping. The sight of Robert standing there, his oldest friend turned ultimate betrayer, froze him in place. Security cameras captured their last moment of relative calm. Two men who had shared 20 years of friendship, now standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable chasm. The conversation started quietly enough. Hotel guests in neighboring rooms would later report hearing muffled voices, then escalating anger. "You were supposed to protect her," Robert's voice grew louder. "She trusted you. We all trusted you." Michael's responses, according to witnesses, were defensive, almost dismissive. "You don't understand," he was heard saying. "What Emily and I have is real. She's not a child anymore." These words, witnesses would testify, were what finally broke Robert's restraint. The first punch caught Michael square in the jaw, sending him stumbling backward into the room. What followed was described by one witness as the sound of furniture breaking and men fighting. Unknown to either man, Emily had followed her father to the hotel. She had seen his expression when he left the house, had noticed the missing gun from his study. Racing through traffic, she arrived just as the confrontation was escalating. The elevator security camera caught her final moments of innocence, a teenage girl running down the hallway, desperate to prevent what she feared was about to happen. She could hear the fighting through the door, the sound of her father's rage and Michael's desperate attempts to defend himself. "Dad, stop!" Emily's voice cut through the chaos as she burst into the room. The scene before her was one of devastation. Overturned furniture, broken glass, and blood. Michael was on the floor, Robert standing over him with a gun now drawn. What happened next would be debated in courtrooms and living rooms for months to come. Emily lunged forward, trying to get between the two men. Michael, seeing an opportunity, tried to reach for Robert's gun. In the ensuing struggle, a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Michael in the chest. Hotel security cameras captured the sound at exactly 7:43 p.m., followed by Emily's scream. Robert stood frozen, the gun falling from his hands, as his daughter dropped to her knees beside the man who had both loved and destroyed her. Michael Davidson was pronounced dead at 8:17 p.m., despite paramedics' desperate attempts to save him. The local police response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, the Hampton Inn was surrounded by patrol cars, their lights painting the building in alternating red and blue. Emily sat in the hotel hallway, wrapped in a shock blanket, giving her statement to a female detective. Her words came out in broken fragments. "He was my uncle. He was supposed to be my uncle. I loved him. I hated him. Daddy, what did you do?" Robert offered no resistance when they put him in handcuffs. His only words, repeated over and over, "I had to protect her. I had to protect my daughter." The news spread through their small community like wildfire. Local news vans arrived within the hour, their cameras capturing the moment Robert was led out to a police car, his face blank with shock. The headline would splash across screens nationwide. Prominent businessman kills daughter's abuser. Lisa Davidson learned of her husband's death from a police officer at her front door. Her reaction, according to the officer's report, was silence. She simply turned and walked to her children's rooms, knowing their world was about to shatter all over again. Amy and Jake Davidson, awakened by their mother's gentle words, became instant subjects of media fascination. How do you tell children their father is dead, killed by their honorary uncle, because of a relationship with their honorary sister? There are no parenting books for such moments. The investigation that followed was thorough and painful. Detectives collected hundreds of text messages between Michael and Emily, each one documenting the progression of their relationship. Hotel security footage provided a clear timeline of the confrontation. Witness statements from hotel guests and staff painted a picture of a violent but brief altercation. Emily's official statement, given 2 days after the shooting, took 6 hours to record. She detailed everything: the first inappropriate touches, the manipulation, the threats, the love she thought she felt, the confusion that followed. Her words would later become key evidence in both the prosecution and defense of her father. Jennifer Parker stood by her ex-husband, despite their recent divorce. "Robert was protecting our daughter," she told reporters. Any parent would have done the same. Her statement would become a rallying cry for supporters who saw Robert as a hero rather than a murderer. Lisa Davidson retreated from public view, focusing solely on protecting her children from the media circus that engulfed their community. She refused all interview requests, but one reporter caught her words as she left the police station. "There are no winners here. We've all lost everything." The criminal investigation uncovered the full extent of Michael's predatory behavior. His phone contained not just messages to Emily, but evidence of other inappropriate relationships with young women over the years. Each revelation added another layer to the tragedy, another weight to the burden of those who had trusted him. The district attorney's office faced a complex decision. The evidence clearly showed premeditated murder. Robert had brought a gun to the confrontation. But it also showed a father protecting his daughter from a predator who had exploited family trust to groom and abuse her. The case quickly became a national talking point. News vans clogged the streets of their once quiet community. Reporters dug into everyone's past, looking for angles to exploit. The story touched a nerve across the country, sparking debates about justice, vengeance, and the lengths parents will go to protect their children. The legal proceedings began with Robert's arraignment. The courthouse was packed, divided between those who saw him as a cold-blooded killer and those who celebrated him as a protective father. His plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity set the stage for what would become one of the most watched trials in recent memory. Emily's testimony during the preliminary hearing was devastating. She spoke of trust betrayed, of manipulation so subtle she didn't recognize it until it was too late, of a man who used family connections to exploit a vulnerable teenager. Her words painted a picture not of a love affair, but of calculated predation. As autumn settled over their small town, the community struggled to process what had happened. The Davidson children were enrolled in a new school, away from the whispers and stares. Emily began therapy, trying to understand her role in a tragedy that had destroyed 2 families. Lisa filed for divorce posthumously, attempting to distance her children from their father's legacy. The tragedy had transformed their community. The easy trust between families was shattered. Parents looked at their children's mentors with new suspicion. The idea that evil could wear the face of a trusted friend had become impossible to ignore. The case would eventually go to trial, but the true verdict had already been delivered, in broken friendships, in shattered families, in trust that could never be rebuilt. The tragedy of Michael Davidson's death was not just in the loss of life, but in the revelation that the foundations of their community had been built on ground far less solid than anyone had imagined. In the months following Michael Davidson's death, the ripple effects of tragedy continued to spread through the community, leaving no one untouched. The aftermath proved in many ways more devastating than the event itself, as families struggled to rebuild their lives from the wreckage of trust and relationships. Lisa Davidson faced the impossible task of protecting her children while processing her own trauma. The family home, once filled with warmth and laughter, became unbearable to live in. Every room held memories now tainted by betrayal. Within weeks, she put the house on the market, moving her family to a small apartment across town. "I don't know how to answer their questions," Lisa confided to her therapist. "How do you explain to your children that their father was both the man who loved them and the man who destroyed their world?" The therapy sessions, initially twice weekly, became her lifeline as she navigated her new reality. Amy Davidson, at 14, carried perhaps the heaviest burden among the children. Not only had she lost her father, but she'd also lost her best friend in Emily. Her grades plummeted, her once vibrant personality dimmed. School became a gauntlet of whispers and stares. Even her closest friends didn't know how to act around her anymore. Jake, at 11, retreated into silence. His video games, once a hobby, became an obsession, the only place where he could escape the reality of what had happened. At night, Lisa would find him sleeping with his father's old sweater, despite everything he now knew about the man who had worn it. The Davidson children faced an impossible dilemma: how to mourn a father whose actions were unforgivable. Their therapist worked with them to understand that it was okay to miss the father they knew while condemning the man he turned out to be. But such complex emotional navigation proved overwhelming for their young minds. Emily Parker's breakdown came in stages. The initial shock gave way to deep depression as she grappled with her role in the tragedy. Her college dreams lay abandoned. The thought of going to NYU now seemed impossible. She barely left her room, tormented by memories and what ifs. "I should have said something sooner," became her mantra in therapy sessions. "If I had just told someone in the beginning, maybe everyone would still be alive." The guilt ate at her, manifesting in anxiety attacks and nightmares that left her screaming in the night. Robert Parker awaited trial from a jail cell, his construction business crumbling in his absence. Jennifer, despite their divorce, visited regularly, trying to hold what remained of their family together. The man who had once been the pillar of their community now sat in solitary confinement, his only visitors his ex-wife and his lawyers. The community fractured along lines of loyalty and judgment. Some stood firmly behind Robert, seeing him as a father who did what any parent might do to protect their child. Others condemned him as a murderer who took justice into his own hands. Local Facebook groups became battlegrounds of heated debates about morality and justice. Support systems emerged in unexpected ways. A group of mothers organized meal trains for both the Davidson and Parker families. The local church opened its doors for community healing sessions. School counselors worked overtime to help students process the trauma that had invaded their safe suburban world. But judgment came just as swiftly. Former friends of the Davidsons struggled with their memories of Michael, some even questioning whether they had missed signs over the years. Lisa found herself excluded from social circles, as if tragedy were contagious. The Davidson children were transferred to a private school after bullying became unbearable. The long-term effects rippled through the community like poison. Parents became hypervigilant about their children's relationships with adults. Trust, once given freely, became a scarce commodity. The easy familiarity of suburban life was replaced by a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. Local businesses felt the impact as well. The country club, where both families had been members, saw enrollments drop. The lake houses, both put up for sale, sat empty on the market, their once happy memories too painful for potential buyers to overlook. Emily's recovery process was painfully public. Everyone in town knew her story, had an opinion about her role in the tragedy. Some saw her as a victim, others as a willing participant who should have known better. The weight of these judgments followed her everywhere, making recovery even more challenging. Lisa had to navigate not only her own grief but also the complex legal aftermath of Michael's death. Insurance claims, estate settlements, and civil suits piled up on her desk. Each document required her to relive the tragedy, to see Michael's name again and again, to confront the reality of his betrayal. The Davidson children struggled with their identity in the aftermath. Amy, once known for her father's charm and her mother's beauty, now felt marked by scandal. Jake, too young to fully process everything, developed behavioral issues at school. Their childhood had been effectively ended the moment that gunshot rang out in the Hampton Inn. Support groups formed for families affected by similar tragedies. Lisa found herself connecting with other women who had discovered their spouses' double lives. Emily joined a group for survivors of grooming and exploitation. These connections provided some comfort, but also served as constant reminders of their trauma. The community's recovery process was slow and uneven. Some neighbors drew closer together, determined to rebuild their sense of safety and trust. Others withdrew, installing security systems and viewing every interaction through a lens of suspicion. The innocent assumption that they lived in a safe, trustworthy community had been shattered forever. 1 year after the tragedy, the changes in their small town were still evident. Empty seats at school events marked the absence of both families. Community gatherings carried a weight of awareness that hadn't existed before. Parents watched their children's mentors more closely, trust having become a luxury they could no longer afford. As the criminal trial approached, the wounds that had just begun to heal were torn open again. Each new headline, each court filing, each piece of evidence presented served as a reminder that some damages can never be fully repaired. The aftermath of Michael Davidson's choices and Robert Parker's actions would echo through their community for generations to come. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a forensic psychologist specializing in family trauma, sits in her office, reviewing the Davidson case files. What makes this case particularly devastating is how the perpetrator used decades of trust as his weapon, she explains. Michael Davidson didn't just groom Emily. He groomed an entire community to trust him implicitly. The warning signs, so clear in hindsight, were masked by years of family friendship. Predators often hide in plain sight, notes Detective James Harper, who led the investigation. They build reputations as pillars of the community specifically to make their actions unthinkable to those around them. Legal expert Maria Rodriguez points out the complexity of Robert Parker's case. The jury had to grapple with an impossible question. When does protecting your child cross the line into vigilante justice? The law is clear about murder, but human emotions and jury sympathy often tell a different story. Community psychologist Dr. Thomas Chen has studied the long-term effects of such tragedies on small towns. What we see here is the destruction of what we call community trust fabric. When someone this trusted betrays that trust so fundamentally, it creates ripple effects that can last generations. 2 years after the tragedy, healing remains elusive for those most affected. Emily Parker, now 20, struggles to build a normal life. She's deferred college indefinitely, instead working with a trauma counselor and speaking occasionally at survivor support groups. "I'm learning to forgive myself," she says quietly. "But I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again." Lisa Davidson relocated with her children to another state, seeking anonymity and a fresh start. "The hardest part," she confides, "is watching my children try to reconcile their memories of their father with who he really was. How do you heal from a wound that deep?" The Davidson children face ongoing challenges. Amy, now 16, continues therapy to process her complex grief. Jake, 13, still struggles with anger issues. Their therapist notes that children in such situations often face a lifetime of processing their trauma. Robert Parker's case became a landmark in debates about parental justice versus legal justice. His trial ended with a controversial verdict: guilty of manslaughter rather than murder, with a 15-year sentence. The jury's decision reflected the community's conflicted feelings about his actions. Dr. Mitchell emphasizes the importance of recognizing warning signs: excessive attention from adults, secret communications, sudden changes in behavior. These are red flags we often dismiss when we trust someone. That trust can be weaponized against our protective instincts. Prevention has become a focus in the community. Local schools have implemented enhanced training programs about appropriate adult-child relationships. Parent groups have formed to discuss monitoring without paranoia, trust with verification. "The lesson isn't that we should never trust," explains Dr. Chen, "but that trust should always be accompanied by awareness." Healthy relationships don't require secrecy. They don't isolate young people from their support systems. The case has sparked national conversations about family-friend relationships and the vulnerabilities they can create. Predators count on our discomfort with questioning trusted figures, Detective Harper notes. They rely on our desire to avoid uncomfortable conversations. Looking forward, experts emphasize the importance of open dialogue. We must create environments where young people feel safe reporting uncomfortable interactions, says Dr. Mitchell. The silence around these issues only serves those who would exploit it. For the families involved, the future remains uncertain. Emily works with advocacy groups, turning her trauma into a tool for prevention. Lisa focuses on rebuilding her children's sense of security. The ripples of tragedy continue to spread, but they're now accompanied by waves of awareness and change. The final lessons of the Davidson case are both simple and profound. Trust, while essential to community, must be paired with vigilance. Family bonds, while precious, can't blind us to warning signs. And most importantly, Protecting our children requires constant awareness that danger can wear the most familiar faces. As one community member reflected, we all thought we knew Michael Davidson. The tragedy isn't just that we were wrong. It's that we never thought to question our certainty. In that observation lies perhaps the most crucial lesson of all. The greatest threat to our children's safety may be our own assumptions about who could never hurt them.